This module covers connecting your Azure subscription to Microsoft Defender for Cloud and enabling enhanced security monitoring, compliance management, and implementation of best practices for threat protection. By the end of this module, you should be able to know how to connect your Azure subscription to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, understand the benefits of integrating Azure subscriptions for enhanced security monitoring. Connecting your Azure subscription to Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a critical step in enhancing your cloud security posture. So I'm going to go to some documentations and then the portal, and I want to show you some of the stuff as we go through this. So we're going to go to the documentation first. I want to point out a couple of things you might want to remember for the exam particularly, and then we'll go to the portal and do a demonstration of how to do this. So here I am back in the learning path and looking at the specific module information of connecting your Azure subscription. What I want to point out, as I mentioned in the introduction, I believe, that you should remember permissions as well as certain default values. So as you read the content, things that are important, Microsoft recommendations that will come up in often these highlighted boxes. But I want to point out this one right here, that it talks about the number of permissions that are going to be needed to be able to perform an activity. And so to be able to go in and do this, you're going to need to either have the owner, contributor, or reader roles. Now, these are built-in default roles inside of Azure itself. These are not Windows Defender for Cloud roles. There are specific ones, but these ones are going to be needed to get access to the subscription so that you can deploy Defender for Cloud against the subscription resources. Now, understand that owner is this superset. It's kind of the high level. It has all these massive capabilities of being able to modify, use, delete. But the important is an owner can change the permissions on the object. The difference between an owner and a contributor can do everything an owner can except change the permissions. It can modify it, it can delete the resources, it can add resources, but it can't change the permissions on them. And then the reader role can consume the resource specifically. And why you want to understand those hierarchical structures is often you might get the question of, what role do you need to have to be able to do this? Well, in that case, you could pick any one of them. But often the question might say, what is the minimum role requirement to be able to do this? And in this case, you might only need the ability to have the reader role capability. So make sure that you understand those role capabilities as you get into it. Okay, so what I want to now do is I'm going to go to the portal and I'm going to actually perform the exercise. And before I get into that, you'll see that as you get into the course content, so here I am still in that course content that I was just showing you. If I click on the next step, you'll see that it has the ability to launch the exercise. And this is what I'm going to be doing. And it brings up the page that has the specific steps that I'll be walking through. And this is something you could do on your own, but you would again need that Azure tenant. You would need a subscription that goes along with it, as well as the applicable role assignments to be able to manage the resources to perform all these activities. So let's go to the portal and I'll step you through this process. I'll be going into the portal in just a minute, but before I do that, I want to talk about this term called scopes. Now, inside of Azure, which is our public cloud environment, what you get is then a thing called a tenant. This is your space within the public space of Azure. Now, your organization may have one tenant, it may have multiple tenants. And I want to point that out because this is going to come up in later modules that talks about when you start to look at log analytics workspaces. Do I have it in multiple tenants or do I collect the information from multiple tenants into a single workspace? So a tenant is the highest level of scope inside of the Azure environment. And our recommendation from Microsoft is that most organizations should start with a single tenant. Now, there's reasons to have multiples, but you want to start with a single tenant. Makes it much easier for administration and then go off from there. Now, below a tenant, you get a thing called a management group. Now, this becomes a logical grouping of objects inside of your tenant, and this is for organizational structure. Maybe you've got a division that's in Europe versus North America, and you have different compliance rules because you've got to work about GDPR in Europe, but you don't have to worry about that in North America. But in North America, you might have to worry about the HIPAA regulations on health information. So this is also going to apply not just from an architectural design inside of Azure, it's going to actually help you from a compliance perspective. Do I need multiple tenants to do that? Because maybe I have a data governance requirement that the information not only has to reside in that area, it has to be in a separate secure environment. So the number of tenants and the management groups are usually going to be at a level that as a security analyst, you don't have impact or input into, but you should be aware of how many tenants and what management groups that you might be working with. Now, we do have a wide variety of management groups that can go up to 10,000 management groups. As I said, we could manage and map many organizations. I've actually worked at some of the largest organizations on the planet, and we were able to map out, all of the different business structures and geographic regions that they belong to in a single tenant with multiple management groups. And then, those 10,000 groups can be mapped up to 7 levels deep. So I could have a management group that had the company. I could have then North America. I could then have EMEA. And then below here, I could have prod and test. And in here, I can have prod and test. So however you want to set that up, so these are all scopes that you're dealing with. Now, below the management group, this is where we get the term called a subscription. The tenant is an organizational structure. The management group is an organizational structure. The subscription is a billing construct. It is a way to group a set of billing values into a single or multiple subscriptions. So you can have multiple subscriptions, and these inherit further down. So if I assign a subscription at the tenant root management group, all of the default management groups below that would then by default have access to that subscription. If I had a subscription that I wanted only available to North America in production, I could create a separate subscription that goes to that management group, and it by default would then be inherited down through its hierarchical structure. It's important that you understand this because one of the scopes that you can deploy your standards to is at the subscription level. Below the subscription, we then get what are called resource groups. And below resource groups, you get the actual resources. And I talk about that because I'm actually going to demonstrate that as we set this up. Okay, so let's go into the portal. So here I've got my tenant, and you'll see that listed up here in the upper right-hand corner. It's got my tenant information. I can now take a look at my management groups. And you can see that I've got the tenant root management group, and this is where I could create that hierarchical structure. And I've got 2 subscriptions that are associated with this management group. Below the management group, I then can get a series of resource groups. Back into the resource groups. And you can see I have a series of resource groups. They're deployed. They have certain subscriptions assigned to them for a billing construct, and then the location in which that resource group is going to have resources based on. And we're going to be touching on this as we go through the remaining modules in this learning path. So what they want me to do in here is I need to be able to now configure the Windows Defender for Cloud and enable the cloud enhanced security features on the server's capabilities. So I'm going to come into Microsoft Defender for Cloud. I can actually either type it in. I think I've got it listed here. So I've got Defender for Cloud. I now want to come into my environments. Should be down here under management. And what I can now see is I can add different different environments. I've got my data sensitivity, my direct onboarding of resources, possibly if they're on premises. And what I can now start to do is here I've got my Azure. This is my root of the tenant. I get the tenant root management group, which I just showed you, and there are the subscriptions that I have below it. Below the subscriptions, you can start to see specific resources that I have inside of that subscription. Now in here, if I click on the subscription, this is where I'm going to be able to configure the policies and the Defender plans that I have available. So I can now come in and you can take a look at the Defender plan. I've currently got all these different features deployed. So the cloud workload protection, I can turn these features on or off, and these are all paid for based on subscriptions. And so I could change the plan. That's what they want me to do in here. I've already set mine to on, but I can change the plan. And there's a free plan. There is a basic plan, as well as I've got the premium plan in here that covers all of these different features. So you can go through and control the deployment of Microsoft Defender for Cloud based around the different resources that you have and selectively bill against those resources based on the subscription that you're working with. Now, if you were to do the exercise, I just want to point this out. This is basically what I've done is I've gone into Windows, the portal, I've brought up the Defender for Cloud, I've gone into the environmental settings, and what they then have you do is, as opposed to steps in here, they say, note, here's an expand the settings value to get to the subscription. So you can see that they've got multiple management groups listed here. And then from the cloud workspace protection area, they want you to actually do something. And while they've picked this plan, this is actually a note. They actually want you to review these values. So they want you to go in and click on that. So read those steps because they're not actually listed in a step outside of the instructions. That's actually something that they want you to do. Okay, with that, that ends the demonstration portion of deploying a subscription to be able to support your Defender for Cloud capabilities. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next module.